Okay, so we got cut off a little bit faster than I anticipated. But when we last left off, we were talking about the Ingres-Delacroix debate. And as I said, many of you who might remember 19th century art or the second half of Survey might remember that debate as being between the idea of Romanticism versus Neoclassicism, or as the debate between, as the contemporaries thought of it, between brush and pencil, or brush and pen, between a brush mark and a line. But I think we can see it from our perspective as really a debate between two different ways of thinking about process. That Ingres was a product-focused artist, where he followed a product-focused process. He had an idea of what he wanted to make to begin with, and then he did studies very carefully, developing his idea with that end goal in mind. Whereas Delacroix was an artist who started with the act, the making, and he allowed things to kind of form in the process of making. He was a much more gestural painter and much more believed in figuring things out in the act of painting, and definitely did not believe in very much in the way of preparatory drawing in his painting. In fact, Delacroix was so, or not Delacroix, Ingres was so focused on product that the way he painted, he would paint like this painting here, the Odalisque. He would paint it entirely. First of all, he would draw it out, every little thing, purely as line drawing, as on paper and then on the canvas. And then he would paint it purely black and white, the whole thing absolutely black and white in what's called grisaille. And then in layers, he would paint thin layers of color over the top of the black and white painting. He also did black and white paintings, purely black and white paintings, as studies ahead of making the finished painting. So it was a very careful and very product-focused way of making art, whereas Delacroix was much looser, much more gestural. And you can see the contrast in these two paintings. So throughout Romanticism, we see, for some artists, a much more an interest in very gestural painting, very loose painting, and allowing the act of making random marks as a way of developing your idea of what the image is going to be. Probably the classic example would be Alexander Cozens, who made these ink drawings that are purely random ink drawings, and then from them used those to spur his ideas about creating landscapes. And his way of thinking was influential in many artists throughout the 19th century. Okay, so that was the break where I was going to start. So let's talk a little bit about the 20th century. So in the 20th century, both at the beginning of the 20th century and then in the 60s, we see what I might call a comeback in terms of artists really thinking about process and putting process over product as being the most important part of making art. The first place where we see this is in the Surrealist movements. The Surrealists, because they were so focused on tapping into the unconscious, they were very interested in automatic processes and random processes, such as in Surrealist poetry and Surrealist drawings, they would do these things called exquisite corpse. I don't know if anyone has experienced that, where you do an exquisite corpse story, where you write a couple of lines, and then the next person only sees that very last set of words, and then they write the next set of lines. You can also do that in a drawing, where one person does a drawing, and then they hide everything except for like the bottom inch of the drawing, and then the next person continues that drawing. So that's kind of an automatic process and somewhat of a random process. But here we have some examples of even more random process. Jean Arp experimented with making art where he literally just ripped up pieces of paper randomly and then dropped them randomly, destroying most of the compositions that he created. But anytime he created a composition that he liked, he saved it. He glued all the pieces down and said, this is good. So the Surrealists were very much interested in these kind of automatic processes, and they didn't only just lead to like artwork that looked very, very random and very abstract, non-objective. Did I just end recording again? What was that?